Well, good morning or good day, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this ICDR Young and International program. Today, we have the career paths of women in international construction arbitration. I will turn it over to our moderator in just a second. Just a word about the ICDR Young and International group. This is the ICDR's Young and International group of practitioners. They've been conducting programs continuously throughout the year. Many can be found. They have been recorded, as this one is being recorded as well, and posted on their site at ICDR.org. If you're interested in joining the ICDR Young and International, there's information there in the application, and they're very active. So if you'd like to follow them, we do invite you to do so. It's my pleasure today to turn the program over to our moderator, Gretta Walters, who is a partner with Chaffetz Lindsay in New York, is also a member of the ICDR's Young and International Executive Board. She works continuously with our team to put these programs together, and it's my pleasure to turn it over to Gretta Walters, today's moderator. Gretta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and the pleasure is really mine. To be here today. This marks the first of a new interview series that we're launching with ICDR Y I, in which we have the opportunity to discuss with different leaders in the field their experiences and get their insights. And we really have a great one for our inaugural sessions today. We're really fortunate to be joined by three phenomenal leaders in the field of international construction arbitration, and they've all agreed to humor me with my questions about the career paths they've had to get where they are today. And I'm sure those on joining elsewhere are also interested. So before we get started, I would just encourage everyone, we have time at the end for questions, but if things occur while we're going, please feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat function as well to interject as we're going through the interviews today. So with that, the goal is for me not to speak much and to take advantage of the experts we have here. So I'll just briefly introduce our three interviewees today, and then turn it to them to hear more about their careers. Just looking on my screen here. First, we have Aisha Nadar, who is based in Stockholm, Runelund Law Firm, where she acts as counsel and arbitrator among many other accolades, which we'll hear more about in a moment. We also have Wendy Venoit, who is a partner at Hinckley Allen, based in Boston, and again has many accolades, including counsel and arbitrator in the international construction arbitration field. And then we also have Dr. Patricia Galloway, based on the West Coast in Washington, who acts as an independent arbitrator and is the chairman of some boards in international construction arbitration, among, again, many other things that we'll hear about today. So I thank you all for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about your careers and your paths. So with that, I think it might be useful if we start by understanding just a little bit more about each of your careers this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are. Maybe Aisha, if we start with you, could you just give us a little bit more background as to what your current role, and maybe explain a little bit on your career path that's taken you to where you are today? And Aisha, you're
I'm on mute. Yes, I think that's the beginning of every webinar. Aisha, you're on mute. So here we are. Yeah, it's a real pleasure for me to be with you and to join Wendy and Patricia in this interview series. And well, basically, I'm a dispute neutral, or a neutral and dispute resolution in the infrastructure space. And my path to this point is a bit circuitous. I guess that's appropriate for an electrical engineer. I started my life as a first degree in electrical engineering. I worked in assembly line automation at General Motors and worked in the defense industry in procurement management. But with any large project, construction or defense, you run into problems. So I started with curiosity and then started pursuing this field of arbitration, and received my LLM at Queen Mary University of London. And by tenacity and persistence, became a construction dispute resolution professional by adding the law and understanding of the law to my engineering background and practice. And so today I still practice in procurement and project design, and also sitting as a arbitrator, mediator, or dispute board member. And I, as you said, I'm in Stockholm. We'll talk,
Great.
I'll stop there and tell you more as we go on.
Perfect, thanks, Aisha. And you know, it's funny you mentioned running into problems when you started out in this field. I've said that a number of times, that I find the construction industry very interesting in a number of ways, but it's certainly good for lawyers because there's often problems that arise. So it's hard to avoid that when you're in this field, for sure. Maybe turning next to Wendy, if we could hear a little bit about your current role and the path you've taken to get there as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm currently a partner at Hinckley Allen and Snyder in Boston, Massachusetts, where I practice exclusively in the construction space, both on the contracting and advocacy side, mainly advocacy. But I also serve as an arbitrator for the AAA, the ICDR. I'm on the mega projects panel of the AAA as well. Most of my work is still as an advocate predominantly, but I probably handle, I would say, 5 arbitrations a year as an arbitrator, which is immensely useful and informs my advocacy in ways I could never fully recount. But I somewhat fell into the construction space as a young lawyer. I didn't know what construction law was, certainly didn't aspire to be a construction lawyer. Never heard of such a thing. But I think, like many people who end up in the industry, I fell into it as a result of the law firm I joined, and quickly developed a love for it. On the international side, again, that was somewhat happenstance. A gentleman joined my firm when I was a third-year lawyer, who was the former head of global litigation for a large international construction and engineering firm. He joined us and said, "Wendy, would you like to try cases all over the world with me?" And I said, "Sign me up. That sounds fantastic," you know. And the next thing I knew, we were flying off to London to start the arbitration process on an ICC arbitration arising out of a project in Lithuania. And it was absolutely fascinating, and I was hooked. And so that led to, you know, one after the other, and I really found that I enjoyed it immensely, and have stuck with it and became more involved in international arbitration and construction organizations as well, in order to further build that network and my contacts. So I've really enjoyed it, and it's through those organizations, frankly, that I met Pat, who is next up on to talk about her career path.
Great, thanks, Wendy. And you touched on a lot of points that we're going to come back to later today. So it's a really interesting context, I think, for background. And as you previewed, Patricia, can we hear a little bit about your background and your current role?
Sure. So I'm currently an independent arbitrator, Galloway Arbitration. I do some mediations as well. I'm a master mediator with the AAA, and like Wendy, I'm on the mega projects panel as well. And I started as a civil engineer out of school, out of Purdue in 1978, and immediately went to go work on one of the largest, if not the first, mega project in the United States outside the Department of Defense, which was the Milwaukee Water Pollution Abatement Program. It was a $1.2 billion program back then. And they had to, C.H. Twom Hill was the program management officer, and they had everybody in control, except they didn't know what control meant, because in the mid-70s, hardly anybody knew about CPM scheduling and estimating and all of that. And here I was right out of school. I became the first woman tunnel inspector in the state of Wisconsin, and I became fascinated with this program because it came about because the city of Chicago sued the city of Milwaukee for polluting the waters of Lake Michigan. And because I was right out of school with scheduling, I went to go work directly for the project director, and I managed the program master schedule and reported to the lawyers and reported to the city council relative to the program being on schedule or behind schedule, and how they would be catching up. From there, I met, through my boss, the next individual who was the president of a company called the Nielsen Worcester Group in New York City. And they were at the time one of the premier international claim firms, and also a risk management and construction management firm. So I picked myself up from Milwaukee, and of course I'm originally from Kentucky, and I moved myself to New Jersey, which I couldn't believe I was actually going to be living in New Jersey, to work in New York City, which was very exciting for a young lady right outside of school. So with that, I became an international expert witness. And that's how I spent most of my career up until 2008. At that time, I had become president and CEO of the Nielsen Worcester Group. We sold the claim side to Marsh, as well as the name. We had purchased the management consulting group called Pegasus Global Holdings from before the asset purchase. With that, I became a management consultant. But at that time, I decided to broaden my arbitration abilities, because I really wanted to be an arbitrator. And I had been a AAA arbitrator since 1987, but they were, of course, very small cases and one of a kind little bits, and I was the sole arbitrator. But I then broadened my education by going back to Pepperdine for the certificate in dispute resolution, and ended up getting the diploma from CARB in international arbitration. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that came about later. But with that, that is what launched my career into the international arbitration world. And since then, I've never looked back.
Wow, it sounds, it's really amazing that you each have had really different paths in your career. So I think, that's something that we should touch on as we go as well, is that there's really no one way to get there. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, particularly in international construction arbitration, where you three are for the perfect example. It's blending, coming from the legal or the technical background more in the path to get there. So it's interesting to hear how you've each gotten to where you are. And maybe before we get more into the specifics of some of your excellent advice I know you'll have for the panelists, maybe we just discuss for a few more minutes against the backdrop of your careers and your current roles. Just what does a career in international construction arbitration look like? So maybe starting this time with Wendy, in your practice, what are the types of cases that you see? Are you working in a particular industry? Is it across the board? What are you seeing in your practice?
In the international sphere, it's been mainly oil and gas, power, and infrastructure. Those have been really the areas where I've been most involved on the international side. And that's because there are the contractors who perform those projects tend to go all over the world to do that. I shouldn't have left off mining too. I've had a few mining as well over the years. But a lot of times it was US-based contractors like the Floors, the Bechtels, the Stone and Webster when it was still around, Foster Wheeler, performing these projects all over the world. Like I mentioned, Lithuania, I had one in Chile, Venezuela under the Chavez regime, very interesting. China, also a very interesting place. So it's been fascinating, but it's really been in those sectors, less vertical construction. I personally haven't seen a lot of contractors going abroad other than like embassy projects and stuff like that. But so less vertical construction in my experience.
Do you find yourself, Wendy, that are you brought in only when the dispute arises, or do you sometimes come in and advise to either hopefully avoid disputes, or you mentioned a number of different countries and construction projects can raise all kinds of regulatory things, related to labor or customs, those sorts of things as well. Do you advise, or do your colleagues help advise on those issues as well?
Yes, typically I act as project counsel before I ever get to the dispute realm. So most of my clients have brought me in fairly early in the project, sometimes before the shovel goes in the ground, to deal with various issues. When I mentioned that one in Venezuela, for example, we had collapsible soils discovered before we ever put a shovel into the ground. And that was a $100 million dispute right at the get-go. And we were actually arbitrating throughout the course of the construction project. But we had significant labor issues to deal with. Venezuela is a was a socialist regime under Chavez, and we had really crazy labor issues with labor unions taking over the site. So, you know, we had all sorts, and then we had a national strike and a shutdown of the entire country. We had a coup. We had, I mean, you name it, it happened, and we were dealing with those issues in real time, and in some cases arbitrating them during the project. That's probably a somewhat unusual circumstance, but I'm usually brought in as project counsel, and then I stay on through the dispute resolution process. So my kind of life of the project can last from the contracting all the way through the conclusion, dispute resolution, sometimes 5-6 years later.
Oh. Did you ever think you'd be using the phrase collapsible soils when you went to law school?
I can assure you I had no idea what that meant. I don't have an engineering background. I was an economics and Spanish major. So that was not within my vocabulary.
I can't imagine. No, I mean, it's really interesting that you know, it's, I can relate to the coming from the more legal side is the things that you're involved with in construction disputes. It just really sounds fascinating, and it's things you could never contemplate being on your radar. So it's really interesting to hear the diversity of issues that you've dealt with and you deal with in your day-to-day practice.
Absolutely, and every case is different. I mean, I went from that one to an offshore wind farm, which was frankly the largest offshore wind farm that had ever been built at the time in the North Sea. And I had to learn welding. I had to learn all about welding and non-destructive testing. I mean, I read the AWS D1.1. For those of you who know that what that is, but I learned more about those things than I ever wanted to know. So it's from a non-engineer, it can be done, but I found it fascinating because every single case has different technical issues. Even if the legal issues are similar, the technical side of it is different, and I think keeps it interesting and fresh.
Yeah, no, it's good insight. And Patricia, how about you? Are you working on similar types of cases in the industries Wendy mentioned, or do you find you're working in different industries, different fields, different countries? What do your cases and your practice look like?
Well, I agree with Wendy that internationally it's heavy construction, it's oil and gas, it's all the energy, and it's all heavy civil projects. And as with Wendy, yes, they also tend to be mega projects and they tend to be mega claims. At least that's what I'm finding on the international side of things. Have had some very interesting international matters. You know, a couple years ago, had a matter in Australia, which was huge. And of course, I used to be chief executive of a company in Melbourne, Australia. And so I was like thrilled when I got the call and said, well, the arbitration is Australia. Is that a problem? And I went, no, sign me up. No. But it was a very interesting case and a very, very big matter. And then, you know, this year, my last matter was a dispute board matter. The last trip before I never got on a plane again was in Dubai. And that was also, I had actually had not been to Dubai since I think the late 1980s, early 1990s. And so it was quite interesting for me to see how dramatically that city had changed in the time period. So I think it's extremely interesting where we see international arbitration today and the types of projects that are there. And I think it also leads to the issues of what I find is the reluctance of folks to go outside the realm of those arbitrators that they normally retain because of the large magnitude of what's at stake. Mm-hmm. And so as we'll talk a little bit later, that getting into international arbitration for us that have worked in international arbitration our whole life isn't always as easy as we may think once we decide that's the path we want to be as the ultimate arbitrator.
And Patricia, you mentioned it a couple of times about the mega claims and the size of cases. Have you found in the course of your practice that cases and claims have gotten larger and more complicated, or what are you seeing with the types of cases in terms of complexity, amount in dispute, things like that?
I do think there's an increasing risk of the types of projects that we're seeing and the mega claims that we're seeing, because a lot of these mega projects are first of a kind. Because they're first of a kind, there brings a lot of the risk in whether the case has validity or not validity, because when two parties enter into a contract for a first of a kind, neither one of you have any really assurance of what's going to happen at the end, because first of all, there's never been a person that will have worked on that type of a project if it's first of a kind. So you run into a lot of interesting, unusual and unique situations that you may not find in a common construction dispute. And I have been seeing a lot more of first of a kind types of projects, and not that the project is first of a kind, but as Wendy said, it may be the largest of its kind, which means then it has an upscale of the various equipment or those types of issues. Or it may be a combination that each individual process piece on its own has been proven technology, but those technologies have never been integrated before. And so these are some of the new complexities I see as we try to build what I would call the greatest, the best, the most economy of scale that you think you might achieve if it turns out okay. But that's what I'm seeing in a lot of the matters that I'm arbitrating.
Interesting. And we I see there's one question. I want to hear from Aisha, and then we'll take the question for this. So just hang tight for the participants for a moment. So Aisha, turning to you now, what are you seeing? Same question, really. What are you seeing in your cases? I mean, you're based in Europe. Are you primarily operating in cases in Europe and disputes there, or are you?
Europe as a center, but I do a lot of cases based in Africa and the Middle East as well, and some in Asia. Similar industries, nuclear, defense, but adding to that defense and transportation, rail and airport projects. And my practice kind of runs from a bit cradle to grave of the project life cycle. I still haven't left practicing consulting engineering. So I served as a member of the board of the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, and I just finished my 4-year term in September. So I see a lot of project complexity in the design, and also when I sit as arbitrator. And I think in addition to what Patricia said, the complexities of unique projects, first attempt, first of a kind, there's also a proliferation of project delivery methods, and everybody's always experimenting with new types of project delivery methods. And sometimes there isn't that clear connection between what our aspirations are and what we document as we have to what we agreed to. So I think that adds to the level of complexity and the layer of complexity when the project actually ends up in arbitration. But in my day-to-day practice, I act as mediator, sit as a dispute board member, act as adjudicator, as well as acting as arbitrator. And what I see is there is an appetite in the market, be it at the arbitration phase or anywhere in the sequence of the project, to try and identify issues and avoid disputes. So there's a big focus on dispute avoidance and bringing some of those tools in the project lifecycle to avoid the complexities of arbitration. I think if we talk about any construction project, regardless of being a mega project or not, it's over a long period of time. It's document intensive. It layers technical issues, scheduling issues, and legal issues. And if you don't identify those issues early, they get more expensive to solve, because it becomes like a layer of an onion. You start layering technical complexities and legal complexities. And in fact, what brought me to the study of arbitration in the first place was working on an air defense project. I was working for the US Air Force at the time as a young engineer, and worked on this particular air defense project that was for an allied nation, Middle East, US contractor. And this case where this project became the subject of arbitration, I was the reverse of Wendy. She learned about soil strengths on the job. I learned about where a contract is interpretable after 8 years of working on the project. And working with outside counsel, it was ad hoc arbitration. The seat was in Switzerland, and it was still in the canton of Zurich before the reform of the Swiss arbitration. So it just kind of dates me a little bit. But as a project participant, then looking at the pleadings of legal pleadings, and the panel, the tribunal was 3 eminent lawyers, I couldn't recognize the project that I'd worked on for 8 years. And that's actually what brought me to the study of arbitration, thinking that there is room for improvement, and maybe I can participate in that. And I can say that the parties were absolutely dissatisfied with the arbitration process and actually settled their dispute at that time, which is a bit unheard of in the when you have a state operator or a party to the dispute. But so I think the complexity leaves room for new probably avoidance issues as well. So anyway, that's my day is kind of varied.
That's really interesting. Do you, I mean, so I know you're acting in a consulting function, as you said, in addition to arbitrators. Do you try to sometimes bridge that gap then in your work, or is that sometimes what you're doing between maybe the lawyers not understanding things properly, or thinking the dispute is something that is different? And I mean, do you think that's an important aspect of something we need to be considering in international construction arbitration?
I think absolutely it's an important aspect to be considering, and it depends on the phase. I mean, Wendy talked about the Venezuela project that, you know, if you're I say lucky enough, or if you are in the upfront procurement planning phase, you can identify the risks and help people understand the risks and how you can face them through the project lifecycle, and then also understand what type of dispute resolution clause they have and how is it that they will operationalize this clause during the project life cycle. So if I'm lucky enough to be brought in at that phase. And so that I believe is where you have probably the most impact in project or dispute avoidance. But depending on my role in every phase, if I'm a dispute board member and I have the possibility in the rules to avoid disputes or to bring those certain issues to the party's attention, I can do that. But the further it gets away from the parties, the people on the ground, and the closer it gets to dispute neutrals, to arbitration, adjudicating the party's dispute, the more difficult it is for the neutral to intervene and help facilitate settlement.
It's really interesting. We had a question from Mahia Marve Igdechi, and I apologize for probably saying that name terribly wrong. Do you want to, Luis, are participants able to ask questions, or is it better if they type it into the Q&A function? There was a hand raised. I'm not sure if you want to. I
believe they have to type it into the Q&A format.
Okay, then I'll just clarify that. Mahia, if you still have the, okay, let's see here. No worries. Okay, it was an accident. Well, now we know if there's other questions as we go, instead of raising the hands, just let's put them in the Q&A, and I'll read them out to make sure the Aisha, Wendy, and Patricia get them. Great, thanks. Okay, so then I'll keep asking my questions then, because I have many here. You know, getting maybe some more now, some some specifics, advice, and some more insight you might have to those interested in the field. I want to talk a little bit about maybe certain obstacles or challenges that you've each faced in your careers, and particularly the very different paths you've taken, and how you've overcome them to get where you are. Maybe, Nels, picking up on something that we've touched a little bit about, something that I'm certainly curious about and think about all the time practicing in this field, is, does your degree matter? And I think, you know, the preview from all of your careers is, it's only a start, and what you do with it and where you go with it is really the answer. But you know, it'd be really interesting to hear from each of you how you know, you've each taken a different path and started in a different place to end up in this field, and whether you feel like there's certain challenges you face that are unique to maybe coming from more the engineering side, going to the more legal, or vice versa. And I'll just give you a small story. After we had our pre-call, I was very inspired by all of you, and had the idea that maybe I would try to get an engineering degree in COVID. I thought, why not get another degree? Anyone else thinking about it, an engineering degree is incredibly difficult to get and time consuming. And I immediately realized I was not a candidate for going back to do the degree over entirely again. So, you know, it's just an intro to say it's very impressive that each of you have traversed, I think, this field with coming from different backgrounds, because it's certainly not easy. But maybe if we start with, starting with Aisha, maybe turning first to you. You know, as you mentioned, you didn't start in the legal field. So maybe you could just share your experiences of any particular challenges or obstacles you found in the way that were unique from transitioning from more of the technical kind of engineering background more to the legal field.
I have to say, my experience when I thought, oh, I can be part of the solution and look at it and help find better ways of doing these things. That was my thought. Now, on the receiving end, I wasn't met with open arms. I have to say that the world of dispute resolution, particularly the world of international commercial arbitration, is heavily influenced by lawyers. And as an engineer coming to this space, and in the world of networking where things are happening very quickly, I could not explain myself I wasn't a sound bite. I couldn't just give a title of partner of White and Case, or which is the calling card or of a white shoe law firm. I didn't have that, and people don't have time to listen to an extended resume of what I thought I could offer. So I found the only way is to try and credential myself in a way that people could understand. I knew what I had, but how could I communicate that? So I started taking every possible course that I could get my hands on in international commercial arbitration. I did Washington College. I did a diploma course at Washington College of Law in international commercial arbitration. I did a master's at SMU in dispute resolution. I did the CIR diploma that Patricia had talked about. And then I did an LLM at the University of London at Queen Mary in international commercial dispute resolution. And all of this was just to kind of give myself a calling card. I learned a lot and I met a lot of people, but I had to figure out how to communicate in this space and to people that, because to be an arbitrator, you have to be appointed by someone. So someone has to value your experience and understand what you have to offer, and that and also a lot of trust, to trust that you're going to resolve. You know, it's a heavy and an honorable position to be appointed, but how do you communicate that and how do you develop that trust? And I needed to add credentials so that I could communicate in addition to all of these things. So that was my story with adding degrees.
It's interesting. And Patricia, when you when we talked a couple weeks ago, I think I written down that you mentioned that you had to learn to talk the talk. If I got that right. I mean, was that one of the aspects that you found that was the most challenging of transitioning from more of a you know, the technical to engineering side to get the lawyers to hear you or accept you, maybe as Aisha said, in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, very similar story to Aisha's story. And that is, you know, when you become, as I said, I mean, I was an international expert in international arbitration my entire career almost. And I thought I knew everything about international arbitration. And so when I gave up that expert witness hat and retired from that part of the business, I thought that there was going to be no problem, that people would just call me up and say, yes, hey, now we would love you to be our arbitrator. And it like didn't happen. And, you know, I had the ability, at least from the initial calling card from ICDR, because I was doing a lot of domestic AAA arbitrations at this point. And so, you know, the ICDR, you know, someone is, as Aisha said, it's got to give you the first chance, right? And so I was involved in a couple ICDR international cases, and I use that a little loosely because the first one was international with a German participant and German equipment, but the project was in the United States. The second one was in Canada. I mean, you know, I mean, I guess that's international, but you know, the Europeans may not view that as, quote, being an international case from their perspective. And so when we get to mentors, I mean, I'm going to talk about, I mean, I called one of my long-term clients who now had become one of the top international arbitrators in the world. I met with him when I was getting my part of my credentialing, as Aisha said, at Pepperdine in dispute resolution. And I was on the international tour as part of that course. And he had dinner with me and he says, you think you know everything about international arbitration. You don't know anything about international arbitration. You have no idea the difference between international arbitration and US domestic arbitration. You don't understand that, you know, you may be dealing with 4 or 5 different country laws, not just one. And he went on, he like lectured me at dinner for like an hour. And I was like, okay, so what do I need to do? And and he said, you know, well, you're starting correctly by being at Pepperdine and getting this degree. And then he, you know, twisted my hand because obviously he was just a major lecturer in the diploma course. And so off I went to Oxford and Jesus College and got that. And then he said, you've got to be involved in the international organizations and you've got to spend time and you've got to network and you've got to do that. And so it took probably a couple years after that before I got the first opportunity from lawyers who I did know well. And now I had a calling card, as Aisha said, because they now felt comfortable that I knew enough to be able to do that. Then the second obstacle then, okay, because now I feel, well, great. I feel very comfortable now and people are feeling comfortable with me and I'm getting cases. But now I'm not getting a chair position and I'm like, okay, I don't understand. I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm really organized. I can actually really manage things quite well. But it was because I wasn't a lawyer. And because I wasn't a lawyer, they wouldn't feel comfortable. So again, it took some folks to actually, how I first got my first major chair position was 2 wing arbitrators who appointed me as the chair because they both knew me. But yeah, those were my challenges along the way. And you know, again, it's a long struggle and it's a long road, but here we all are now, and it's interesting to look at our lessons learned.
Thanks for sharing that, Patricia. And I'm really curious to hear Wendy's views now, particularly hearing from Aisha and Patricia, both who have had frustrations, it sounds like at times, with the lawyers and, you know, especially entering the field and feeling like the lawyers maybe don't always get it or there's some sort of disconnect. Have you felt that coming from the more legal side and operating in a very technical field with a different approach? Have you found challenges in both dealing with clients and other experts in the field?
Well, you know, when I first started practicing construction law, I had to learn the lingo, right? Lots of acronyms and terminology that normal people don't use, right? So, whereas engineers would say lawyers speak a, legal language that no one else in the world uses, vice versa, they use a language that we wouldn't normally utilize in our everyday life, right? So I had to learn all of that terminology, not unlike when I went to law school and had to buy a Black's law dictionary and look it up. I bought a construction glossary, which I think NAWIC put out, that explained what all those words meant. And then when I started working in the international sphere, I had to learn a whole new set of rules because international arbitration is vastly different from domestic arbitration and US-based litigation practice. And so I had my first international arbitration was ICC. I promptly bought the Craig Parkin Paulson ICC arbitration handbook and read it cover to cover because I had to get smart on this new set of rules. Not to mention I was dealing with English barristers and solicitors who have there's a level of superiority when it comes to international arbitration. And so I had to get smart fast so I didn't get railroaded. And so, so I learned the lingo. I fortunately had people around me who were experienced in the international sphere. They taught me how to write in the English way, labor has an OUR at the end and stop writing like an American. Things like that. But again, it's just a new rule set. You can learn it. It's certainly not an insurmountable obstacle, but you have to be receptive to the changes or the differences, both as an advocate and as an arbitrator. When I sit as an arbitrator, I have enough experience from sitting as an advocate that I understand how those should be managed and conducted. And sometimes I find myself as the arbitrator reining in US-based counsel who want to turn it into domestic style arbitration or even US style litigation. So, it's yes, there's obstacles, but certainly not insurmountable. As a woman, it was definitely interesting though. My first foray into international arbitration, I showed up second chair in a very large ICC arbitration, and one of the wingmen arbitrators automatically assumed that I was the paralegal. In fact, noted to my male partner that he had his girls trained quite well. And to his credit, my partner's credit, turned to that arbitrator who had a sir before his name and said, "Are you trying to get me killed? She's my partner." So it was surprising, but I guess not altogether unusual. I haven't really encountered that since, thankfully. And no one else on the panel made comments quite like that. But, as a woman, I did encounter some degree of that when I was more junior, less so now as people get to know you and you network and they're used to seeing your name and face. You don't get that nearly as much.
I've gotten a court reporter, not the paralegal for me, mistaken for the court reporter. But thanks for sharing those insights. I think what a lot of what all three of you have touched on is that the right skills and the degrees are just one piece of the equation. And I've heard you each mention different things about mentoring, networking, involvement in different organizations, things like that as well. And we're getting quite a number of questions too, so I'm going to try to pull some of those into these questions as well. Maybe Wendy, sticking with you for a minute, just thinking beyond the skills and kind of degrees, you mentioned networking as an aspect that as part of your career, and it's been important in the field. And I think we've all probably experienced that. Law is a small world, international arbitration is a smaller world, and international construction arbitration is probably a smaller world within a smaller world in a small world. So, how do you navigate that kind of world within a world and network in this field? Is it, have you found it's too small, or is that a positive or a negative?
it's a very small world for international construction arbitration. There's actually a remarkably small group of people who actually do it, surprisingly enough. There's a lot of people who would like to do it, but there's few that I think actually do it. And you can find those people. I mean, for me, I started to identify both bar and professional organizations that would allow me to network with both industry people and other lawyers, because both groups have something to offer. And, you know, on the Bar Association side, I got heavily involved with the American Bar Association Forum on Construction Law. I became the chair of the international division of the forum before I became chair of the overall forum. But as the international division chair, I hosted events for the IBA, International Bar Association, International Construction Projects Group. I would host cocktail parties for them when they came to the United States or Canada or other jurisdictions. I started an international lawyers listserv. So if people needed a lawyer in Mozambique, they would ask me and I could shoot out a request. Hey, anybody know a construction lawyer in Mozambique? And so I got to know a lot of people, and a lot of people got to know me because I became this conduit of referrals all over the world. And so, you know, but that was a great networking opportunity because, you know, flash forward 10 years, I get hired by a Spanish contractor to represent them. And the general counsel says, hey, I know you. I met you at the IBA annual meeting in Vancouver. You hosted a cocktail party. I was there. And then I started getting emails from you regularly. So, you know, those kind of networking opportunities, it's the long haul. I mean, it's the long game, right? It's not short term by any means. It's the long game, but, you know, meeting people, maintaining contacts in a non-creepy stalker way, and continuing them, I think is so important. You know, I was also the general counsel of one of the largest construction companies in the US. For a few years. I found those networking contacts to be extremely valuable as a resource in that position as well. So, you know, not only can it lead to work, but it can also provide you with resources that you wouldn't normally have. When I needed Canadian e-discovery law, I contacted a few of my contacts up in Canada, and they inundated me with free information, more than I ever could have expected, more than any of my partners would ever send me, mind you. So, you know, having that network of contacts and resources can pay off in ways that you can never quantify.
You know, it's interesting that saying the playing the long game. I think I've heard each of you say some variation of that. It's an interesting insight. Aisha, turning to you for a moment and just kind of thinking about that maybe long game aspect of things. You know, it sounds like when you were talking about your career path earlier that you really identified maybe a need that you felt like that there was to fill in this construction industry. I mean, do you think finding some sort of niche and carving out a space for yourself, is that really important to excel in this field? Oh, Aisha, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I think it's important to know your strengths and focus on that. I mean, I look at myself as a package. I call myself a cross-functional mutt. I mean, I'm engineering, business, law. I worked in defense. I work in construction. I'm Egyptian American. We immigrated to the States when I was in '69 when I was 4. So, and I traveled a lot in my life. So that package is my strength and is my weakness. So I have to tailor my approach to finding what best suits me and continuing to work both as a consulting engineer and in the dispute resolution field. I think Wendy said when you act as counsel, it really feeds there's a lot of cross learning. Well, there's a lot of cross learning if I continue in my consulting engineering practice and then in dispute resolution. So you kind of learn how to put projects together and from taking them apart. And but focusing on your core competence as a person and thinking of those as strengths, as opposed to feeling a bit inferior. Because I remember in 2005, I had a good friend. She was a managing partner of a law firm, and when I embarked on this road, she said, well, if you're serious about participating in this world of arbitration, you've got to come to the IBA. And I went to the first IBA in Prague, and I felt intimidated because I was busy trying to say, I'm not a lawyer. I felt like I was a fraud if I don't say something. So if I want to swim in this space, I have to develop a confidence about the skills that I do have and learning where I can carve them out. I'm not a pedigree lawyer, and I more than likely I would not be participating in a field that's outside of the technical field in this arbitration realm. So focusing on what it is that uses your strength on that niche, and kind of cross learning. Don't give up who you are. Just add to it. And so that's the tip that I would give to anybody who's listening is, kind of really find the belief of who you are, because the world isn't going to be welcoming and say, like Patricia said, oh yeah, you're available now. Let's appoint you as the first arbitrator that we think of. You've got, and don't lose the strengths and the qualities that you come with, but just how to design the right niche for yourself, and depend on people, because people really, not everybody helps. Like Wendy said, she got so much information from Canada, and you get help from places that you may not expect it. It may not come from your partners. It may not come from people within your organization, but listen and really find those people that are willing to help.
That's great advice. And actually, it leads me to something I wanted to follow up with Patricia on, getting that advice and help from other people. You mentioned earlier, Patricia, the importance of mentors. And I just wanted to learn a little bit more about your experience in, how you sought out mentors and how that has been helping you in either, establishing yourself or learning to develop the skills you need to have a career in this field.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've had mentors all my life. From my mother, telling me I can do anything I want to do. I grew up with a single mom and an only child, and that mentoring that she gave me and that encouragement went a long way in how I sought out mentors my entire career. At my first job at CH2M Hill, my boss, who I was the only second woman engineer ever hired by CH2M Hill, which is kind of interesting. And so being in a completely all man's company at that point, I looked to my boss to see how I could best fit in. And he is the one that actually introduced me through that to what would become my new boss and business partner eventually at the Nielsen Worcester Group. And he hated to lose me, but at the same time, he said, you're on a different career path than what we can offer you here. And a true mentor will tell you that. And again, so under my new mentor, who basically taught me everything that I needed to know about, major construction and arbitration, and the importance of a witness and what a witness does and what a witness doesn't do, was also extremely valuable to me. And then when I looked to be that arbitrator, I looked to those who I had worked with and had appeared before, and who had become very good arbitrators. And so a lot of Doug Jones. And so, Doug Jones way back when was our client in Australia when I was chief executive of our subsidiary there. And then when he gave up basically his practice and became an arbitrator, He's the one that I had dinner with that night. And if you all know Doug, he is not shy for telling you exactly his opinion on something. And, you know, that's when, yeah, he gave me that long lecture, but then he said, but here's how I can help. And he was instrumental for me getting on the international front. And I often hear a lot of young folks say, gosh, you know, I don't know how to get a mentor because what if they say no? And I just tell people, you know, you'll never know unless you ask. And so you'd be surprised at how many folks out there would really like to help you. And all you have to do is ask. And if they say no, then you ask somebody else. But having a mentor, I think, has been instrumental for my entire career, and I can't be more thankful.
We're getting a few questions to follow up to this really great advice. One of them maybe to start with is, how can those interested in pursuing a field here, how can COVID-19 and when the world's gone virtual like it is, how can that impact the careers of women in international construction arbitration, and you know, how can you overcome that? And maybe Wendy, turning back to you, maybe specifically, we've had a couple comments specifically, how can you maintain contact in a non-creepy way? So I mean, are there more challenges to do that in the virtual world, and what do you recommend for people to do that?
Okay, well, I'll start with, how can you maintain contact in a non-creepy way? I mean, this is every, you know, marketing person's question, right? You know, because you want to maintain those touches, but you don't want to come across as a stalker. I'm a big fan of, you know, newsletters or letting people know about important case developments or legal developments that might impact them. And just saying, hey, I'm not sure if you heard about this, or my firm published a newsletter on this, thought this might be of interest to you because I know that you have projects in that area or, you know, that region. So this might be of interest to you. I'm not overtly asking them to do anything. I'm giving them resources that might be useful. I mentioned I maintained that network of referral network because advocates and in-house counsel alike often need advocates in some or expertise somewhere in the world. So maintaining that network gave me an excuse to get my name in front of them, but in a useful way. And people like to refer other people. It's actually interesting from a social perspective, but I found that people readily will reach out and say, oh, you've got to use these 5 people. So that's real useful. You know, I write a lot, I lecture a lot. I you know, 15 years ago, I drafted I was the executive editor for International Construction Law, which is a publication. You can buy it on Amazon if you're so interested. But I, you know, regularly lecture on international construction arbitration with John Hinchy. He and I have a bit of a traveling roadshow, and you know, spoke in Montreal, spoke at the American College of Construction Lawyers, spoke at the ABA, various locations, and republished our paper probably 5 times now. But that gives you visibility and in front of people that might hire you. I mean, from my speaking engagements with the AAA and the ICDR, I've had people reach out and say, hey, I heard you speak twice now at AAA-ICDR conferences. I want to reach out to you because now I have a problem and I need help. And so, you know, same thing as both in the sphere as an arbitrator as well, that name recognition goes a long way, so that if your name shows up on a list from the AAA-ICDR to advocates, you want them to recognize your name and pick you. If you're an unknown commodity, you are less apt to get picked as an arbitrator. So the networking is and name recognition is so important in getting picked. I saw somebody ask a question about being picked as a woman. I got to tell you, I was told by the AAA that I'm only one of 2 women construction arbitrators on the panel in the Northeast, or at least in the greater Boston area. and there is a push to have more women on panels. So I think that's actually been beneficial. And in the last several where I've been picked, the wingmen, who were both men, all said, you should be the chair. So they pushed me kind of into the chair position. I'm not sure that it was because I was a woman or because I was, a lot younger than them. But nonetheless, I found myself in the chair position more in recent years. And I think that has something to do with being a woman. So I do think it's beneficial to be a woman in this industry right now. One final point, how do you network in this COVID environment? I think there's actually more opportunities than there used to be. Whereas you used to have to get on a plane, pay a disgusting amount of money to travel somewhere in the world. IBA is almost cost prohibitive for a lot of people to attend because it's so expensive. Now you can attend these events virtually, in some cases for free, and you couldn't do that in the past. So I think there are more opportunities because the travel cost is not there. I think it's actually better in many cases. I miss the one-on-one social interaction. I'm a big fan of the social aspects of conferences, but for younger junior people who may not have been able to attend those types of events in the past, I think that this virtual world opens opportunities that may not have existed previously.
So maybe picking up that last point on new opportunities in the virtual world, you've mentioned a number of organizations that you've had leadership positions with during your career. Do you think that those sort of opportunities are still there for younger and rising lawyers to pick up those, get involved with different organizations and take leadership roles in the virtual world? Or do you see more challenges to, following those kind of traditional paths maybe with certain organizations right now?
No, I think those opportunities are there and will continue to be there. Literally, you have to, all these organizations, particularly volunteer-run organizations or primarily volunteer-run organizations, they're always looking for help. They want volunteers. If you raise your hand and say, I want to volunteer, I'm willing to do any of these things, and then you follow through. Okay, the follow through is extremely important. You follow through, you accomplish the objectives, they will come back to you again and again and again. And then that leads to those leadership opportunities. Mm-hmm. But it all starts with reaching out, raising your hand and saying, I want to be involved. I'm willing to work on these committees. What can I do? And then running with it. That's the key.
Mm. The follow through it sounds easier than it is, and it's harder to find sometimes. Aisha, did you have something to add to that thought as well?
Yeah, just to what Wendy had said, and I think we need to kind of keep in mind that the everybody talks about you got to go to the last mile, and in regard to follow through, and it's really important to keep in your mind that the last mile is not a very crowded space, because there's a lot of people that don't follow through. Yeah. And if you are going to get involved in organizations, your objective, the path that Wendy outlined is to get involved and get to leadership, but that can't be your objective. Your objective has to focus on, maybe that's your long-term objective, but making a difference, helping the organization reach their goals. Because if you help an organization reach its goals, then they will want you there more, and they will promote you through the ranks. And it's kind of, I would not join an organization just for the sake of joining. Pick the organizations that share your values. Pick the organizations that share your aspirations, that their vision and their mission is something that you believe in, because then it would make it much easier for you to actually focus on being there for the last mile and come up with creative contributions to that organization. Mm-hmm. So don't spread yourself too thin, but professional organizations, industry organizations, they've all, the IBA International Construction Projects Group has been warm and welcoming and helpful and mentoring. And I can't say enough in my own experience, like Patricia, I know Doug very well, and his advice is always crystal clear. Might not be music to your ears all the time, but it is crystal clear. Philip Cap, there's so many names and I met a lot of them through CIR, the course at Keble College in Oxford, and the IBA, International Construction Projects. But then I'm also participating in my own professional organizations like FIDIC and the like. So, but pick them and focus and go the last mile.
Interesting. Patricia, we've this theme of, kind of thinking about the longer game and going the last mile and the long-term planning. One of the questions I wanted to follow up with you on that. One of the questions we've got from the audience is whether the speakers can share their experience and how they received their first appointment as arbitrator, and whether you have any advice to get that first appointment. I know you've kind of touched on it a couple times with your answers today, but is that part of this long-term plan? I mean, are there certain things that you recommend people do to get that appointment, or is it putting in the time and doing all these things that we've been discussing today?
I think it's a lot of what everything that Wendy has said and Aisha has said. I mean, it is a long game. I mean, the folks that you meet from day one, this is a very, very small industry, as Wendy said at the very, very beginning. The construction industry, you have a very high probability of meeting the folks that you know today 20 years in the future in a very different role. And so one recommendation is make sure you never burn any bridges. I mean, there's here in the States, Tim McGraw is a country Western singer, and I don't know, how impactful he might be internationally, but he has a great song that always says, be humble and kind. And I think that having respect for everybody that you meet, regardless of what you may feel about their views or the way they do things, we all do things differently. And I think that's the interesting thing about being international, is that all of our cultures are very different. And what may be acceptable to one culture may not be acceptable to another culture. And so I think that there's an awareness of getting that first appointment is how you have been viewed, on how you have conducted yourself over all of your career. And so it's very important to, we all do make mistakes, and we all do have those instances that we wish we could roll back the tape and do a retake on it. But unfortunately, we can't in our life. And so I just always tell everybody, I mean, again, my very first mentor and my boss at CH2M Hill, that's the advice he gave, is he said, you never know who you're going to see today that you're going to see 20 and 30 years from now that may give you an opportunity. And the very attorneys that were either opposing counsel asking me questions as a witness, or who I worked with, are now people that I am sitting with on panels. Mm-hmm. And so that's the type of networking I think we've all talked about, but that is the long game. And there's no guarantee on how you get appointed to that first appointment. I think it's a trust buildup. I think it's a credentialing buildup. I think it's the networking. I think it's everything that everyone has talked about today. And someone will give you that first opportunity because they know you and they know your capabilities. And if you're willing to step up and do that, you will get that opportunity.
It's interesting. So one of the other questions that's come in is specifically if any of you have faced any inequalities because of your gender, and whether you think women are taken seriously in this field, and if you think that has any impact on either being selected as counsel or advisor or arbitrator as well. And maybe we can start with Aisha on this one. I turn to you because I know, I think I have the statistic right, that you were the second woman on the FIDIC board in 113 years. So if that's right, true. Then you that's certainly true. Have experience in being a woman amongst very, very many and outnumbered by the men. So I'd be interested to hear your take on how being a woman in this field has or has not impacted your career, both negatively or positively.
Yeah, I think starting from being a woman in my engineering school, I was 126 men, 3 women, working with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Air Force. being assumed to be the secretary. I wasn't even a paralegal. I was still the secretary and asked to get the coffee. And that was fine at that stage, or I mean, that it wasn't fine, but it was more expected at that stage of life. It is true that I'm not only a woman, I'm an immigrant in the US. And so you can, but I think you can take whatever aspects that your package is, and you can either feel like you are an immigrant to a space as a woman or as an outsider, or you can feel like you're an expat in that world, like you're coming to impart knowledge in that space. You're different. Being a woman in a male dominated field, you are different. Some people are not going to respect you or not think that you're credible, or I've always found that you have to prove yourself competent, while men are just assumed to be competent. It's assumed when they're at the table, there's a reason that they're there. My reason was, if it's not to get coffee, then you have to prove that there's some valid competence there. My advice to people is, you can't change the world. You're going to run into people that like you more or less, or I've been also treated better because I was a woman, or had more opportunities given to me because I was a woman. So yeah, but it's not to feel that you need to change the world. You can work on that, but you need to build your own career. So my first piece of advice is, don't be upset when it happens. It's not right, but if you take it with calmness and try and educate the people in front of you, or help them understand what you do bring to the table. Some of the people that had the least expectation of me are now some of my strongest advocates. So don't be surprised if you see somebody that's not gonna, if you look different, don't be surprised if somebody calls it out and says you're different, but just go with the flow and believe in yourself. I mean, that's my key takeaway. I mean, I had, like Patricia was talking about her mother, I had fearless confidence by my parents of saying, you can do whatever it is that you want, you can be whatever you want, study whatever you want. And so that inner belief is what I think, if I can have one takeaway today, is I just encourage both women and men to believe in yourself. Never let somebody shake that confidence in you. Do your homework, but believe in yourself once you've done that.
Oh, that's great advice. The other thing that you said today I really like that I'm going to keep is, the last mile is not a very crowded space. So I'm going to take that with me as well. I thought that was a good quote. But Aisha, that's maybe just a last point to follow up. I don't know if there's comments from Wendy or Patricia on this as well, is that idea of, expectations maybe aren't always, that you're fighting against expectations sometimes. As a woman in this field, as coming from the different backgrounds that we talked about. And I guess the question is, are there, it sounds like you're hinting at it too, but are there opportunities in that? Because people expect you to be something maybe you're not, or make assumptions about them, that you actually, being a woman as opposed to a male in a heavily dominated field, or a lawyer in an engineering field, or an engineer in a lawyer field. I mean, are there opportunities that you've found from that too, that that I think get to your core message, that it's really kind of exploiting who yourself is, and how you can really make that as kind of part of your story to excel in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's to just kind of you bring your strength, and I would just say your strength are part of the package, and you have to be humble in accepting help from others and seeking help from others. And I just like to circle back to the COVID times. It's, I had a lot of help. You meet people face to face, you develop trust. Now we're in a virtual space. I would encourage people that are listening on this call to say, if they, LinkedIn now is this great facilitator of reaching out. And I think in a non-creepy way, you can reach out to any one of us on this panel and invite us to join you on LinkedIn, or send us a message and say, I heard you say this. Can I talk to you about this? Can I have a 10-minute chat with you, or a 10-minute Zoom call about this particular topic? I think this is a unique time, this COVID, this 100-year pandemic, but it doesn't change the humanity of the world. In fact, I think it's brought out a lot of the humanity. And I think you can make creative ways using something like LinkedIn, or to engage professionals with lesser cost. And you might get 2 no's, but you might get 5 yeses. So just take a chance. And I know for me, when people reach out to me in that way, I'm willing to engage and willing to give them time, because it's nice to help people, because there's a lot of people that help me forward. So paying it forward to the next crowd. So I'll stop there.
I think that's really helpful, though, as maybe a last word as well. As I think I shared with all of you when we a few weeks ago, something I struggle with myself is just feeling like you're bothering people to contact them sometimes. So just hearing that it's okay to do it, and being reminded that there's no harm, and it doesn't hurt anyone to send them an email, is just hearing that is a good reminder and helpful, that we should just do it. There's no reason not to. So I think that's a good parting point as well. And I also very much appreciate you said that the participants can reach out and connect with you, because I know there's more questions that I had wanted to ask you about your very interesting careers, and we had a few more in the chat, but unfortunately this takes us to the end of our 75 minutes for the panel. So I would just like to send incredible thank you to each Aisha, Wendy, and Patricia for your really invaluable insight and experience, and hearing about your remarkable careers and how you have gotten to be in the positions of leadership here. So I just thank you very much for sharing your very open and personal experiences. It's been really, really eye-opening, and I at least have a lot to take away from it. So I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Gretta.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Gretta.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. As we said, this program has been recorded. We will advise you when it is posted. Thanks for sharing all your information. Gretta, you're moderating, and I wish you all a very pleasant day.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.